Well, I hope you feel our panellists have had an opportunity to set out their stall, and now it's a time for you to ask questions, either from things arising so far or from new themes. Terry has got a microphone, and she will pass it around. So basically, questions please, ladies and gentlemen. And I think Yvonne, fine. And by the way, if people would like to say their names and their affiliation very briefly, that's great. If they want to remain anonymous, that's fine.
I'm Yvonne Guarianto from Cheadle Labour Council. And my question is, a lot of people have been talking about increasing staffing, 20,000 nurses here and so on and so forth. David Cameron today in the papers was talking about making the NHS available 24 hours, 7 days a week, laudable. My question is, how are we going to fund that staffing and where is it going to come from? I think actually Sean mentioned that it takes a long time to train doctors. But at the moment, agency staff are actually draining money out of the NHS. We have a situation in Stepping Hill where there's, I believe, a shortage of consultants, particularly in A&E, hard to recruit them, but there's also a shortage of nursing staff. Nurses, apparently, according to some articles in the papers, are leaving the NHS to get bigger pay from the agencies, and the agencies are then charging the NHS several times what they pay them themselves.
Yvonne, just a very short question, because lots of people. Thank you, and I don't think everybody can answer all the questions, but I think this one particularly relates to you, Mary. You will have heard this thing today, that mysteriously David Cameron's going to have consultants 24/7. As a hospital consultant, I would have loved it. Where are these consultants going to come from, and where's the money going to come from?
Thank you. And mysteriously the money that these people will arrive. Well, obviously there's going to be nothing mysterious about getting more staff in. And it is, I think Yvonne's quite right. We need to get to the staff, and there have been 8,000 more doctors and nurses. We've got more district nurses. We've made a pledge to do that. And Salford Royal, I was watching last night, they have got a news piece.
A very specific pledge, the pledge of 24/7 consultants. That's really what we want to focus on. Thank you.
And it was showing those district nurses who are going out into the community and doing things in a different way. So yes, we do need to get more nurses. Yes, we do need to train them up. And it is going to be a question of getting that training in place.
I'm going to go complete Paxman on you and say, answer the question, which was 24/7 consultants. What is? How on earth will you produce those 24/7 availability consultants?
Well, we're going to have to recruit, and that is the best thing that I can say on that one.
From what pool?
I can't, as you say, mysteriously magic people up. But it seems to me that if you want to get people to work, you recruit them.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to pick up on that one? Yep. Fine, Martin and then Mark.
Well, all I can say is, and actually, to be fair to Mary, and I think it's true for all of us, is there is an assumption that public policy is like a light switch. You throw it one way and the light goes on, you throw it the other way and the light goes off. Public policy actually has a cascade of consequences, and when you throw the switch, actually it's not always easy to simply reverse it. We do have to be fair and say that it will take time to transition to these things, but there has to be an absolute commitment to do it. I think Yvonne's question is really significant in terms of the fact that we have lost people from the National Health Service who have been unhappy with the way it was going. Nottingham, for example, has lost its a world-renowned dermatology unit, actually now gone because the consultants refused to work for a private sector company. Okay, so there are pools of people that could be drawn on at short term to fill those gaps, but there would also have to be a development programme to bring more people in for the longer term. But we need to start working it now.
Thank you. Mark, I think you're going to
just briefly, I have to say, I think the idea of consultants being available 7 days a week and being announced right now tells you an awful lot about how serious a suggestion it is, frankly. I think it's a gimmick for short-term electoral gain, but I guess I would see it that way. I mean, some of us would settle for, at the moment, for being able to access consultants 5 days a week. If any have had the misfortune to have relatives seriously ill in hospital, as I have over the last few years, and want to have access to consultants, it's not even there 5 days a week in some of our hospitals. hospitals, and we heard from the questioner about the problems that Stepping Hill are having. You can't just magic these people up. The pool isn't there at the moment. It does take a long time for them to come through. But one thing's for sure, if we don't commit the resources going forward, this is never going to happen. But let's try and make sure that those consultants are there doing the job that we want to see them doing 5 days a week at least. 7 days is a great aspirational target, but whether or not it's delivered without the funding commitment, I very much doubt.
Thank you. Right. Next question. Quick answer, Sean. That one.
Yeah, absolutely. As a former engineering manager, I can tell you right now, the answer of 24/7 today is a simple maths. Okay? To go 24/7, you need to split into 3 shifts. You either cut the manning during the day by 2/3, or you have to increase the NHS by 2/3, like that. Where are they coming from? The kids now in schools can't afford, and they don't want to be saddled with the debt through university. So we've got to recruit overseas. The problem is, a lot of our doctors, I was doing some research last week, are in Australia. Now their salaries have gone up, their conditions are better. They don't want to come back now, a lot of them. So whatever commitment financially is made now, as I said, is 10 to 15 years in the future, 3 administrations away. Yeah, and that's what you've got to look at. And the thing about funding, we actually would like to make those subjects in university for free, the STEM ones, and actually use those people and encourage the youngsters to come through, to be doctors, consultants and nurses.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. I think, is that Brian? Right? Brian Priest? Yeah.
I'm Brian Priest, Stockport NHS Watch. As you all know, we asked all of you to sign a pledge regarding TTIP. And most of you did it willingly, and we're very happy that you've done that. I would just like to talk to 2 of the members of the panel. First of all, Mary Robinson, who didn't sign it. And the reason that she gave was that she wanted TTIP because she thought it would make more available American medical technology. Now, since there is already no tariff barrier between the US and the EU, I don't understand what difference TTIP is going to make American technology available to us, especially when we've got an excellent pharmaceutical industry in the UK already. The other member of the panel I'd like to speak to is the UKIP candidate. I thought, oh look, it's a very, very glib answer to say we wouldn't be part of TTIP because we want out of the EU. But you are a free market party. Your leaders, Nigel Farage, and most of your leadership are free market people. And instead of having the EU as a massive counterweight to the weight of the United States, we'd be a tiny little country. We would be forced into even more disadvantageous trade agreements if we came out of the EU. So I would like to know from the UKIP candidate what he would do when the US comes to the UK, the independent non-EU UK, and asks for all of our environmental restrictions to be lifted, our employment practices to be taken down to American levels, to allow Monsanto to sell us GM crops, etc., etc.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you. So there's 2 questions about TTIP, one clearly for Sean and one clearly for Mary. Sean, the second one was for you. Do you want to kick off with that one, and then Mary will deal with the first one?
Yes. Firstly, if UKIP won, we wouldn't be in the EU. And one of the big things that would give us is our seat back on the World Trade Organization. Before we became part of the EU, we did perfectly well. We don't need the EU to help us. We've got the Commonwealth out there, we've got the rest of the world. I've worked with and for American companies. It's true, I have. We've worked for American companies, and they're not nice companies to work for. They expect you to work 6 days a week. Now, we have our own employment laws, which we had before we were in the EU. Now, what's to stop us putting our own employment laws back? Nothing as far as I can see.
Fine, I think there's a murmur that may suggest perhaps some dissent from the other end before we go on to Mary's question. Either Martin or Mark? I heard you sort of murmuring, as it were.
Well, the debate tonight isn't about the EU, despite what some people on the panel seem to think. It's about the NHS and TTIP and energy policy, I thought. But the idea that we can just drop all these measures which have benefited us from Europe, the employment protection stuff that's come from Europe, the maximum number of hours that people can be forced to work and are obliged to work, these are all things that have come to us from Europe, and I just don't think never mind the fact that in Cheadle, and I speak, with some knowledge on this, our 4 biggest employers are European-owned multinationals: Thales, BASF, MAN Diesel and NXP Semiconductors. Just ask yourself the damage it would do to our local jobs. So I'm sorry, I rose to the bait. I shouldn't have done, because it's not central to tonight's subject, but I was chuntering in the side.
It is a good point, because it is what we brought to together. Thank you. And then Mary, your question was the reason you gave for not wanting to sign the pledge against TTIP was that you felt we would have better access to American technology if we were signatories to the TTIP.
Medical pharmaceuticals and technology and anything else that we can benefit from through having a free trade agreement. And whether I picked something that you are going to say was already within our remit to do is something that you're entitled to say, but I wasn't quite sure that was what I said. Although I'm not going to dispute it, maybe we picked this up wrongly. When I was asked yesterday about signing a petition, it was something that was out of the blue and something that I hadn't been approached about before. So I gave an answer which I felt was quite fair, and I still would keep to that answer.
Thank you. I'm going to take Chairman's prerogative here, and the Business Innovation and Skills Select Committee published an absolutely scathing report on the level of discussion about TTIP in this country and how the democratic process hasn't taken place, how the claims of 100 billion extra trade are totally unfounded if we sign TTIP, and of course there is absolutely no guarantee of protection to our public services, and that was the Business Information Skills, and it's not dominated by Trotskyites. So Terry, yes.
Hi, Mark from Dunwhite, concerned citizen, slightly hacked off. Just wanted to get off the subject of the NHS for a minute. All the panellists are unanimous in their understanding and worry over global warming and also their need to boost the economy. So I'd just like to hear from each of them how they're going to kickstart the green economy.
Right, who'd like to kick off? Who's going to kick off on that one about kickstarting the green economy?
I think we already have done. I think there's an awful lot more to be done, but I said at the beginning that I was proud that the Energy Secretary, the Climate Change Secretary, Secretary of State to Cabinet is a Liberal Democrat, and I think we have progressed that agenda. The amount of energy now being generated by renewables has increased threefold in the life of the coalition. Still not enough, we still have a lot more to do, and we are willing to catch up. We've had the Green Energy Bill. I was one of the many people who was disappointed the Green Energy Bill didn't go further and faster. But I have no doubt at all from all the discussions I was involved in, it wouldn't have happened had my party not been part of the coalition. We've also set up the Green Investment Bank. So I think the green agenda has been taken forward, and I think I can honestly say we've played a central role in keeping it there on the political agenda. I would say to you, you don't hear the Prime Minister talking about green issues very much these days. There was one time, of course, when he thought it might have been to his electoral advantage to do so, but we've not been hearing that recently. I think we've made a big start under this government. There's all kinds of schemes that people are helping people to insulate their homes. There's more jobs now involved in renewables. All sorts of things have been taken forward, but there's still a long, long way to go. And I hold my hands up. We do need to be ambitious, and we do need to be determined that this agenda will not be allowed to slip in the next Parliament.
Thank you. I think we have a lady here who wants to ask a question, I think. Yes, thank you. Incidentally, can everybody hear the question? I beg your pardon, terribly sorry. Yes.
So I would say, the Green Investment Bank notion, I think, was a really good idea. Now, I'm not going to criticise the government for that. I don't think it's freed up the level of capital investment in green infrastructure which is necessary. And there do have to be new ideas. And indeed, there are things like green investment bonds, for example, where we can think about actually ordinary citizens investing in those bonds to give some capital which can be pumped into pump priming the renewable industry and so on. The other thing is that this is not a policy, and it's not a party point, is I think far too much of our current renewable and frontline renewables is based on small projects where individuals actually have to work their way through some quite difficult structures on feed-in tariffs, for example, for solar or for biomass incentives and so on. And actually, I think what we should be looking at is, can we network at local level these small providers together to give much more sustainable, easier to produce projects which generate over a larger area? There are things like that we could do, which I think would make a massive difference.
And actually, given that it's a green issue, fancy me ignoring the Green Party member here, so all in green.
Thank you. If I could just say quickly, quite a lot of the things that we've talked about tonight, that I've talked about, that are in the Green Party manifesto, do create jobs and get the economy going. We could stop throwing things away and we could repair them. That creates jobs. We could build houses because we urgently need more affordable housing. Building houses which are built so that they conserve energy, that would get the economy going. Investment in the National Health Service and more jobs there would play the same role. And of course things like better insulation, improving existing properties create jobs.
Thank you. Sounds like a convergence of goals. Yeah, because
Right, well, Left Unity supports the plan for 1 million climate jobs that Martin mentioned in his summary on the issue of energy policy. And this is a fully costed plan that's been worked out by the trade union group of the Campaign Against Climate Change to create 1 million jobs in carrying out the conversion to renewable sources of energy production for Britain, for the creation of a new national grid, which is the way to answer the problem that Sean raised. What do you do when the wind isn't blowing? You can't store it when it is blowing and then use it when it isn't. You need a grid because the wind will be blowing somewhere in Britain at any point in time, between Cornwall, Wales and the North East, etc. We've got a massive coast. You can build a grid because the sun will be shining somewhere. And you can build a grid that is international to the extent that it needs to be, with international cooperation that is needed to combat climate change. So 1 million jobs can be created by converting energy production to renewables, by retrofitting housing, the whole of the housing stock, for energy efficiency, public buildings for energy efficiency, and by a massive transfer of resources to public transport. And it would all be cheaper, as Martin said himself, than the financial bailout was in 2008.
Thank you. I think we can move on to the next question. Yes, thank you.
I'm Papa Giorgio, Stockport. I wanted to bring up something that Mary Robinson said when she was describing what the NHS was. And she seemed to query if clinics were part of the NHS or could be privatised. And I think that it's very important that the NHS is part of a team and that the cleaners are as important as anyone else in the NHS. And there's no way employed privately. Martin, I think this is more directed to you. When you were talking about you being against privatisation and the internal markets and tenders and things, and then you were asked where the funding was coming from for the NHS, where would the increased funding? Well, if privatisation was drawn back, surely there would be less admin costs for that. You said there were 16% now, and there used to be about 5%. But if you had all this, got rid of the internal market and privatisation, tenders, etc., then surely there'd be more money left for frontline care, proper NHS care. And also, it would mean that the profits weren't going to private companies and their shareholders, and surely that money could also be used in the NHS. And
should we deal with those questions? That's quite a rich array of questions. My stacking mechanisms are getting. So I hope people can hear the questions. There was a question about what is the NHS, and if you privatise, do you lose that team coherence and team spirit? And a very specific challenge to Martin about really reversing the internal market. Something that was being done, as you know, in New Zealand and was done in Scotland shortly after devolution. And the idea, if we reversed all the forms of the market, internal, external, we would save an awful lot of money. It's been estimated about 10 billion. So how do you feel about reversing the internal market?
Well, forgive me, I don't actually take it as a challenge. I actually take it as quite supportive of my position. Because I was talking about additional funding over and above what the planned provision. Absolutely, I actually think that some market privatisations have been incredibly expensive, hugely costly. I mean, we've talked about the hospital, which has had to be, the private companies withdrawn from. Part of the reason for that is actually that the debts that it's incurred are probably massively more than the assets associated with the hospital. So absolutely, I think there's that extra potential for us to minimise the costs associated with current clinical provision and to inject extra capacity from the sources that I've talked about. So I think those things do go absolutely hand in hand.
Thank you. And the question for Mary, I think, about what happens, if you like, to the ethos and the coherence, the spiritual coherence, if you like, if something like the NHS, if you basically outsource cleaning, you're no longer part of the team. And I just go back to my time as a junior doctor. The cleaner was my greatest friend when I was a junior doctor on the ward for 104 hours a week. We don't even know, we cease to know who the cleaners were when they're outsourced. So I think it's a very important part of the ethos of hospital and of the NHS. That's why tearing it apart may not be a good thing. So what do you feel about that? Do you buy that vision, as it were?
Well, it would really seem strange to me if the cleaner who was your best friend in one uniform would cease to be your best friend in another. Surely people, no matter what their uniform they're working, would be working as part of a team. And if they're not, then that is part of the management of that team, frankly, and that would be my answer to you. And it was the question when I asked it was a genuine one. What do we mean by the private sector in the NHS? And the answer is that it is all of it. It would seem to be that it does include, the private sector would include those cleaners, depending on what uniform they were wearing. The attitude seems to be that they wouldn't be part of a team. That would be a real shame. And it's not the NHS that I've experienced or that I've had any contact with. The NHS that I've experienced has nurses and doctors working alongside those people who do that other work, who do the cleaning. It is a team. It's a team if you make it a team, and it's a team if it's managed properly. And it shouldn't be dependent on the uniform that you wear.
Okay, thank you. And I think we have a question from the gentleman here. I think, yes, Matt. Yes. Do you want to declare who you are?
Yes, I'm Matthew Torbett, the independent candidate for Cheadle, and we've been speaking a lot about funding for the NHS, and I'd like to speak to the panel about mental health funding. Mental health funding, mental illness accounts for 27% of NHS usage, yet only gets 13% of the NHS budget. Depression, amongst other things, affects 1 in 4 people, one of which I am, and yet, Mr Hunter, I can't help but admit that you played your part in the coalition government for a party that says they treat mental health seriously. Mental health services were cut by £800 million this last Parliament. I'd like to know why, for a start, and also to the panel, your plans for funding of mental health and the most vulnerable in society.
Thank you, Mark. Do you want to kick off?
I have to say right at the start, I don't recognise the figure that you've just referred to, but I'd be very happy to answer that subsequently if you provide me with a background as to where you've got that from. But I would have thought that one thing, if nothing else, that people might have heard about the Liberal Democrats as we've approached the last few months is the commitment from Nick Clegg and our health spokesman Norman Lamb to invest much more money in mental health. And I would say to you, quite honestly, I think we have done more to put mental health back on the political agenda than any other single party. It is now being talked about as an election issue. You know, I think that's progress, that we're actually getting people to address those issues about mental health. Look, I talk to people like Pennine Healthcare that provide those sorts of services for our area all the time, and I know where they fall down. You know, I deal with constituents who have issues about one of the things that I've spoken up in Parliament about, anorexia and bulimia in particular, which are mental health problems, almost always, but not exclusively, affecting young women. It is a tragic waste when those kind of things happen. And that's why I think the Lib Dems have been right to highlight mental health, to say for the first time we're going to introduce statutory waiting times for mental health treatments as well, because we have them for all other forms of treatment, and to, if you like, put it back on the agenda, because mental health for too long has been the subject that dare not speak its name. It's been a Cinderella service. Nobody's wanted to talk about it. But if you think, if you have figures that are suggesting a cutback of the order you're talking about whilst the coalition's been in office, then I'd be very interested to see them, and I promise you I will answer that.
I think it's true to say that Lib Dems have committed themselves to a parity of esteem, I think is the phrase, between mental and physical health, haven't they? I think that's, yes. Would anybody else like to respond to that? Yes, I've got loads of respondents. I think Martin, and then I think John, and then I think Gary. So forgive me if I'm
I think the fundamental problem is that actually, even if you reinstate the funding, actually it won't have parity of esteem, because it's an area which has been underfunded for so long, even at the old levels, and it's actually been treated pretty much like a Cinderella service. So there are two things. One is, yes, the party is committed to reinstating funding to provide for mental health services. The second is actually to think about the balance of where our health spending is actually spent relative to need overall within the health service. That's a fundamental review which is necessary about how we structure our spending, because it's not alone in that. I think there are other services which actually, some of which receive disproportionately high levels of spending relative to the proportion of patients and the demands of those patients. So I think it's a short-term issue, and there's a much longer-term issue as well. But actually, this is not just, I think, about, it's not just a health issue, it's actually a social justice issue as well. And actually it goes back to some of the stuff I talked about in terms of primary care, and provision of primary care for people. Actually, it's about job opportunities for people who have mental health problems, and it's actually about ensuring the society, for example. One of the areas where hate crimes are actually increasing is in people with disabilities, and people with mental health disabilities in particular. And actually, if we get dealt with that, I think we do an awful lot to help people's personal sense of well-being.
Thank you. Just a quick response now from John and Gary, because we've got 3 questions in the pipeline and we're getting towards the deadline. So, John, a quick one, if you wouldn't mind, and Gary likewise.
I want to link this issue with the issue of a democratic structure for the National Health Service, which is sadly lacking. And we know that unless the NHS reinstatement bill becomes law, then we're going to be stuck with these marketised purchase of provider split structures that include CCGs with the sort of personnel that I highlighted earlier. Because if we had a democratically controlled NHS, there'd be no question that we would have to have parity of esteem for mental health services and physical health services. I know that because I've been honoured to work with the very vibrant campaign, Stockport Against Mental Health Services Cuts, petitioning on the streets of Stockport. We heard the views of the Stockport people. We took them to the council's Health and Wellbeing Scrutiny Committee, and the councillors sat there and looked at their boots because they had no answer to the 16% cuts in mental health services that are still to be made in Stockport. So you need a democratic structure. You've got to scrap this whole marketised structure, reinstate proper democratic health authorities that have representatives of workers, health workers, councillors,
just a short answer. Thank you.
And reinstate the community health councils too. And that's the way you press them.
Sorry to do this to you, John, but a very quick 2-sentence answer. 2 short sentences.
The Green Party would increase spending on mental health services faster than on other parts of the health service to restore the balance. But the other thing that I want...
Set for that. Thank you.
As far as I know, the local health issues, the mental health issues, are basically handed off to the council. So if you keep voting for the council tax parties and cutbacks, especially in Stockport with the cutbacks they've done, you're not going to get increased funding. something that has to be paid for somewhere.
Thank you. Thank you. Fine. I have a question at the back. Thank you.
Irene Harris against mental health. I'm from the Stockport Against Mental Health Cuts, and I'm also from the Mental Health Carers Group Stockport, which we had over 120 participants on Wednesday in a meeting about comparative esteem. I'd like to say about the candidate that his figures are from Rethink and also from the Royal College, that in order to get comparative esteem we need 23% spending. National average is 13%, and from Gina Evans from the CCG Commissioner in Stockport this year it is 8%. Also, the CIP, the cost improvement cuts that are carrying on from last government and this government were 25% last year, and this year they've got it down to 16%, but that is just in community mental health services. That is 6 qualified jobs for mental health nurses. It is unspeakable, and we really would like to know how you intend to improve the CCG health funding here in Stockport, as well as getting comparative esteem in research and all the rest of it in the government, and the 8% is from young people to the elderly, and we've got a lot of those, like myself, in Stockport.
Thank you, Irene. Thank you. I'll pass the question over.
Would you like people like to fill these in about mental health and the election before you leave?
Would you like to choose a particular individual to whom you want to address your question? I mean, obviously, I don't think everybody can answer. Is anybody particularly you want to address the question to?
I think Lib Dems, Conservatives and you,
I think Mark, you felt a bit on the back foot about the reducing funding for mental health and didn't recognise the figure that was given to you. Irene seems to have suggested there is something to that figure.
Well, I think it was Irene mentioned what sounded to me, unless I necessarily like the slightly different figure, but I'll stand by what I said before. If you provide the evidence, I will look into that and try and give you a straight answer to it. What I do know is that we've committed £1 billion over the next 5 years to CAMS specifically, because of the issues, as you say, of mental health affecting young people. And it is a particular problem in young people. It's not exclusive to young people, but if we're not tackling it at an early stage, then these problems are going to get worse and not better. So I think a commitment to putting extra funding into it is at least a step in the right direction. And I mean, to be fair, Norman Lamb, who's the minister that speaks on this for us, has talked very emotively because he's had these problems and issues in his own family as well, and I think does speak with some authority on them. The last time he was in Stockport, I took him to see Stockport Mind, amongst other people, to talk about mental health funding issues and what more needs to be done by government. So I am listening to what's being said, and I agree with you, a lot more needs to be done. But I'd come back to the point I'd said before about the challenge on specific figures. I'm very happy to check that and to come back to you with a straight answer. I'm very happy to
well, thank you. So just very briefly, the other parties, because I'm very aware that Lib Dems have committed themselves very strongly to investment in mental health. With one sentence each, I'm sorry to say this, Martin and Mary and so on, the investment in mental health that is proposed.
Well, can I just, I think I can reconcile the two figures, and I think Matt was referring to the cut in the provision that was, and I think the lady there was talking about if you took it up to actually what the proportion of the service required compared to others, that would be up at the 27 to 13% mark. I think that was the difference between the two figures.
I'm afraid I've got to go one sentence over because we're getting near to injury time, so just, what is, can you summarise?
The initial step is to reinstate funding for mental health in order to deal with the cuts. There's a second step to rebalance the health budget to the areas which actually need it.
Thank you, Mary.
Well, I agree that this parity theme is something that is extremely important.
But hard cash investment?
Yes, and we are committed to putting extra money into mental health services, particularly in terms of the cognitive and the talking therapies, all of which have proved to be extremely important. But it just seems to be extremely difficult to take that there is such a difference between what we would say would be provided for mental health and for other health issues and for disabilities. There shouldn't be that. and we shouldn't accept that parity of we shouldn't be saying that parity of esteem is so aspirational that we can't achieve it. We should be moving towards it.
John.
Yeah, say 14% of the NHS's national average annual budget by scrapping the marketised structures, tax the rich, and tax the corporations to raise the money to meet people's needs.
So, just a quick one, if you can, on mental health.
Very easy, yeah. Personally, we rebalanced the budget within the NHS, as we've said, from the savings that we've already identified. I would also replace the care quality commissions with elected boards. Because, and the other thing we would do, the money to fund it, there's 40% increase in management that's absolutely not necessary. We'd remove them and go back to a better structure and use that money.
Thank you. And finally, very briefly, John, sorry to make you brief.
Until I retired a year ago, I worked as a clergyman, and I found that a lot of people who had mental health problems found that they were exacerbated by things like the bedroom tax and delays in paying their benefits, or benefit sanctions or benefit cuts, and that is part of the picture, and that needs to be tackled as well.
One of them, afraid, the last two questions. Ian Barker.
Ian Barker, Stockport NHS Watch. My question's about the recent announcement of the £6 billion health budget being devolved to Greater Manchester. I mean, I've got marks to ground. I don't know whether it'll be a good thing or a poison chalice, but I know that a lot of doctors, the vast majority of Manchester doctors, weren't aware it was coming. So, and there's been certainly no discussion in the local Stockport Clinical Commissioning Group meetings about it. So, anybody feel free to answer any part of these questions. What you think of the idea itself, whether you think the £6 billion is enough, what you think of the process, this seemingly undemocratic process that it's come about through, and whether it's the beginning of the end of the word national in NHS.
Very good. All four of them.
And what do you support the referendum?
Sorry, far away, Mark.
It is a very good question, and the short answer is I think it's too soon to say if it's going to be a good thing or a bad thing. As ever, the devil is in the detail with these things. I was talking to Jane Besant, who's the Chief Executive at St Anne's Hospice, just the other week about this. She sees it as an opportunity to try and get some more significant funding arrangements going forward for hospice care. But my concern is the fact that this has been accepted by council leaders, including our own, across Greater Manchester in principle. I agree with the principle of devolution, but this is a big, big step, and I do think the devil, as I say, will be in the detail. And I'm happy to talk to you in more detail about it, but I want to give others a chance as well on that.
But Martin, particularly about the democratic process, because I think certainly I know that Mark didn't know about it until he's read about it in the paper, and he's a local senior politician.
An awful lot of people who didn't know about it until they read it in the paper. A lot of senior politicians. I think, if I'm honest, I think the way that this emerged was actually shocking and wrong. And there's nothing else to say. It was shocking and wrong. I'm not opposed in principle to devolution. I'm not actually opposed in principle to devolution of health powers and so on. I actually believe, for example, when we had strategic health authorities making decisions at local level, that didn't fragment the National Health Service because they were still part of a national framework. So I do agree with Mark that there's an issue about the detail and how it actually plays out. Will it compromise things like the integration of health and social care? Those are fundamental questions that we do not have the answers to yet. And if it did, that would be a massive, massive, catastrophic blunder. But we don't know that yet. So the way it was done was wrong. The principle isn't necessarily, but we need to keep a damn close eye on the detail of this.
Is there anybody on the panel who dissents from that? Because it just seems to be that you dissent from that view.
Yes. I don't agree with devolution foisted on people. We believe in democracy.
Well, I think that's what Martin was saying.
Yeah, absolutely. But the first thing they did when they got the £6 billion was formed an executive board to sit there and decide what to do with the money. So, how much are they all being paid now? That's money that's now disappeared out of that budget.
Very good point. John and Mary and then John.
I want to make a very quick point indeed. At 10:30 a.m. tomorrow morning in Piccadilly Gardens, Manchester, there's going to be a demonstration against this very thing. It is an outrage. The Greater Manchester Combined Authority isn't elected by us. It's an undemocratic body and there's been no public consultation. So I invite you to support the demonstration.
I would say, whether you agree with it or you don't agree with it, it was the leaders of the councils that entered into this agreement and were part of the negotiations, and those were council leaders from the Labour Party, from the Conservative and from the Liberal Democrats. And so it had that level of agreement between the democratically elected leaders of the council.
So you don't think that the notion, Ian Barker is taking tremendous interest, detailed interest in all the deliberations CCG, and he knew nothing about it. Mark knew nothing about it. None of the local medical committee knew anything about it. Doesn't that look like a coup to you?
Well, it looks like it was done in a way that involved all the councils and didn't involve the MPs. So whichever way you want to look
or
at that.
Doctors, or CCGs. Yeah.
Just to add to this, we asked the chairman of the CCG, Ranjit Gill, when he knew about it, he said, at the end of September. My GP didn't know about it till I believe several people on the panel had no idea about it. What does that tell you about the democratic process led by your leader, Mary? Could we have a direct answer, please?
Well, the democratic, obviously I would have liked to see some sort of consultation. I like consultation. But I have to assume that those leaders, democratically elected leaders of the councils, were in discussions and in negotiations with the government for some time. I don't know, but that was what I assume.
Alas, I have to call things to a halt. We're actually into entry time now, and I know we'll get thrown out of the building. And I know there's some very good questions that I'm stopping. I just remember the Health and Social Care Act. At the centre of it was a mantra, no decision about me without me. If there could have been a decision without pretty well the whole population of Greater Manchester, that was one. But I just dropped that as a sort of thought. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've had a fantastic panel. I really am grateful. Martin Miller, Mary Robinson, John Pearson, Sean and Gary from the Greens, who came in at very short notice. You've been a fantastic audience. Thank you for turning up on a wet and windy night. We've had lots to think about. I want to finally thank Kathleen Rosati, who is the person who runs the Stockport Art Gallery, and she couldn't have been more helpful. So I hope she's in the room hearing it, or we'll leave the trace of that station in the room when she comes on Monday morning. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for your questions. Here's the democratic process going on in Stockport.